Your alarm goes off. You groan. You already know the shape of the next 9 hours before you even open your eyes. A commute, a desk, a list of tasks that never actually ends, just pauses. You tell yourself this is simply what being human means. Wake up, work, come home, repeat, and call it a life. But the real answer is far stranger. For most of the time humans have existed on this planet, nothing about your morning would have made any sense at all. No alarm, no commute, no boss, no 8-hour shift, no 40-hour week, no concept of a job at all. And yet people still ate, still built shelter, still raised children who survived to adulthood, sang songs, told jokes, and grew old. So what were they actually doing with their days, if not this? Start with a number, because numbers are hard to argue with. Anthropologist Richard Lee spent time in the 1960s living among the Ju'hoansi, a hunter-gatherer people in the Kalahari Desert of southern Africa. He tracked exactly how many hours the adults spent finding and preparing food, down to the day. The results surprised almost everyone who read it. Around 15 hours a week, sometimes 20 in a harder season. Almost never anything close to 40. 15 hours? That's less than 2 shifts at a modern job. And this wasn't some easy, resource-rich paradise handing out food for free. The Kalahari is one of the harshest environments on Earth, dry and unforgiving for most of the year. Still, the people living there met their needs in a fraction of the time you'll spend at your desk this week alone. Lee's data landed at almost the same moment as an idea from another anthropologist, Marshall Solins, who in 1966 argued something that sounded almost offensive to modern ears. He called hunter-gatherers the original affluent society. Not affluent because they had more stuff. Almost the opposite. Affluent because they wanted less, and what they wanted they could get quickly, without machinery, without debt, without a manager checking in on their progress. Affluence, in his telling, isn't about how much you produce. It's about the gap between your needs and the effort required to close that gap. Shrink the gap, and you're rich, even carrying nothing but a digging stick and a water skin. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? Here's where it gets stranger. The rest of the day, the part that wasn't spent gathering roots or tracking animals, wasn't wasted, and it also wasn't leisured the way you understand leisure. There was no clean line between work time and free time, the way your calendar chops up the week into little labeled boxes. Time simply moved through whatever needed doing as it arose. Storytelling around a fire, tool-making, slow and social, more like conversation than labor. Childcare, shared across the whole group rather than dumped onto one exhausted parent alone in a room. Long, unscheduled stretches where nothing in particular happened, and nobody apologized for it. Anthropologist James Sussman, who spent decades among the Ju'hoansi himself and later wrote an entire book tracing the deep history of human work, described this kind of society as treating rest as a baseline condition, not a reward you had to earn through suffering first. You didn't need to justify sitting still. You didn't need a wellness app to grant you permission to nap in the shade. The idea that idle hands were somehow dangerous, that stillness had to be paid for with prior exhaustion, simply hadn't been invented yet. There's a biological thread here too. Sleep researcher Jerome Siegel studied several present-day societies that still live largely outside industrial schedules, including groups in Tanzania, Namibia, and Bolivia. He found something that contradicts almost everything you've heard about natural sleep. No rigid bedtime, no 8 hours logged like a factory shift. Sleep arrived when darkness deepened and the body cooled, not when a clock said it should. There was no such thing as insomnia in these communities, at least not as a named complaint. The pressure to sleep on command, the way you're expected to now, appears to be a modern invention layered onto an older, looser rhythm. So if humans had all this unstructured time and so little pressure hanging over their heads, why does none of this describe your life? The shift didn't happen because humans got lazier or suddenly grew more ambitious. It happened because of a technology that quietly rewired everything downstream of it: agriculture. Around 10,000 years ago, in scattered pockets around the world, people started planting instead of foraging. And this is the part that breaks most people's assumptions completely. Farming didn't make life easier. Skeletal remains from early agricultural societies show shorter stature, worse teeth, more infectious disease, and harder physical strain than the foragers who came before them in the very same regions. Farming produced something foraging almost never could, though: surplus, stored grain, stockpiled food that didn't need to be found fresh every few days, that could sit in a pit or a granary through a lean winter. And surplus needs guarding. Surplus creates the first version of haves and have-nots, a distinction that barely existed when nobody could hoard a wild yam for 6 months. Surplus is countable, taxable, controllable. Once food could be stored, it could also be owned, withheld, and used as leverage. That's the moment something like hierarchy becomes possible in a way it wasn't before. That's the moment someone can start telling someone else when to work, and for how long, and what happens to them if they refuse. Your ancestors didn't invent the 8-hour day because researchers calculated it was efficient for the human body. They inherited a system built on the control of stored surplus, refined over thousands of years of agricultural and feudal life, industrialized ferociously in the last 2 centuries, and handed to you as if it were simply how humans work. It isn't. It's one arrangement among several the species has tried, and a strikingly recent one at that. Here's the twist that should really unsettle you. The 40-hour week wasn't calculated from how much labor a human body and mind can sustainably absorb without damage. It emerged from labor negotiations and factory disputes in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a political compromise number that simply stuck around long after the negotiations that produced it were forgotten. Meanwhile, deep in your biology, you're still carrying the wiring of someone who expected long stretches of unstructured time, communal caregiving, and rest that required no permission slip from anyone. Your brain didn't get an upgrade when the factory system arrived. It just got asked to perform a schedule it was never built for, and told to call the resulting exhaustion normal. That mismatch shows up everywhere now, if you know where to look. It shows up in how strange it feels to sit still without your phone in your hand, as if rest itself has quietly become suspicious. It shows up in the guilt of a slow Sunday afternoon, that small voice asking whether you've earned the right to do nothing yet. It shows up in how many people, when finally handed a genuinely free hour, don't know what to do with it because unstructured time has become almost a foreign language. You weren't born feeling that guilt. You were taught it, generation after generation, ever since surplus first needed a guard posted over it. Even the way you raise children carries the fingerprint of this shift. Anthropologist Sarah Blaffer-Hrdy has written extensively about what she calls cooperative breeding among early humans, the practice of spreading childcare across grandmothers, aunts, older siblings, and neighbors rather than isolating it inside a single household. That distributed model likely made human childhood possible in the first place, giving mothers room to forage, rest, and socialize while a baby was cared for by someone else nearby. Compare that to the modern picture of a single exhausted parent, alone in an apartment, expected to work a full job and raise a child essentially solo. The isolation itself is not some ancient default. It's a side effect of a world reorganized around private property, private houses, and private labor. It's worth noticing, too, that this pattern wasn't unique to one desert, one people, or one continent. Similar studies of the Hadza in Tanzania, another foraging society still practicing something close to this older lifestyle today, found comparable numbers. Researchers there recorded subsistence work in the range of a few hours a day, with plenty of time left over for rest, play, and long, unhurried conversation. Across radically different environments, from arid grassland to dense forest, the same pattern kept repeating. Small, flexible bursts of effort, followed by generous stretches of nothing in particular. It wasn't a fluke of one lucky region. It looks more like a default setting for the species, one that held steady across tens of thousands of years and thousands of miles, right up until it didn't. Think about your last actual day off. Not a sick day spent recovering just enough to return to the grind. Not a burnt-out collapse in front of a screen that leaves you more tired than before. A real day where nothing at all was owed to anyone. How did it feel? For most people, the honest answer is a little uncomfortable at first, maybe even a little guilty. That discomfort isn't a personal flaw, and it isn't proof that something's wrong with you specifically. It's a signal of how far the modern schedule has drifted from the rhythm your ancestors lived inside for nearly 200,000 years, compared to the roughly 2 centuries you've spent inside industrial time. None of this means you can quit your job tomorrow and forage for roots in a nearby park, satisfying as that daydream might be. The world you live in runs on different rules now, and those rules aren't dissolving anytime soon. But there's something worth sitting with here, something worth carrying into tomorrow morning. The exhaustion you feel isn't proof that you're falling behind some natural order of human effort, some ancient standard you're failing to meet. It's evidence of a system, a relatively young one in the grand span of your species, quietly asking more of you than your body was ever designed to give without complaint. So tonight, when your alarm is set for tomorrow and the list of tasks refuses to shrink no matter how much you cross off, remember this. Somewhere in your genes is a version of you built for 15 hours of gathering, long, unhurried afternoons, and evenings spent simply talking with people who mattered, sleeping when the dark told you to, and not a minute before. That version of you isn't gone. It's just buried under 10,000 years of surplus and 200 years of factory time. Your alarm goes off, and for a moment before you open your eyes, you might wonder whose life you actually inherited.